Okay, let's unpack this because you might have seen the headlines this morning.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
NFL legend and media personality Shannon Sharpe is now facing a $50 million lawsuit.
Oh, very
That
much.
kind of figure immediately tells you we're dealing with something significant.
It certainly grabs your attention, doesn't it? And it really underscores the seriousness of the accusations being made.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're not just, skimming the news reports. We're diving into the specifics of this developing story.
Right.
Our main source here is a discussion from the Long Crime Network YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
In their sidebar segment, presenter Jesse Weber spoke with civil attorney John Clune. Now, he specializes in sexual abuse cases, so he's got some real insight.
That's a good source.
What we want to do here is move beyond just the initial shock, really try to understand the core allegations against Sharp, the ones detailed in this lawsuit filed out in Nevada.
And also get a sense of the legal landscape, right? How
Yeah.
these kinds of cases actually navigate the system.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's vital for you listening to understand that, okay, yes, this involves a well-known figure, but the issues here are much broader.
Definitely.
We're talking about consent, power dynamics, and how our legal system grapples with these very, very sensitive and complex situations.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a key question for you, the listener. When someone as prominent as Shannon Sharpe faces allegations like this, what are the immediate implications? Beyond the celebrity gossip.
What are the real-world ramifications?
Exactly. That's what we really aim to explore in this deep dive, the central claims, the legal perspectives around them, and, well, some of the potential roads ahead.
Okay, so let's start by focusing on the person bringing these allegations. The lawsuit identifies her as Jane Doe.
Right, keeping her anonymous for now.
Yes, and she's represented by attorney Tony Busby. Now, you might recognize that name.
Oh, yeah.
Busby's been involved in several high-profile cases recently.
Yes, and Busby actually made a point of announcing this new case publicly. He went on Instagram, I think, and expressed his pride in representing Jane Doe, highlighting the great deal of courage it takes to stand up against people with, significant power and resources.
He basically said he intends to vigorously pursue the case in court.
He did. So let's get into the crux of it. What are the specific allegations detailed in this lawsuit? What's actually being claimed?
Well, the core of Jane Doe's complaint lays out a really troubling narrative. It alleges a pattern of manipulation and control by Sharpe,
Okay.
which reportedly escalated to threats of physical violence, things like choking, slapping,
Wow.
and ultimately it culminated, according to the suit, in rape.
And the lawsuit specifically states this happened despite her saying no repeatedly.
Explicitly. It says the alleged acts occurred despite Jane Doe repeatedly saying no, which right away brings the critical issue of consent front and center for you.
Okay, so where does the lawsuit say this all started?
It details an initial encounter at a gym in Los Angeles. Jane Doe was 19 at the time.
19. And Sharp is, what, 56 now?
Correct. A very significant age difference. The lawsuit claims Sharpe had been watching her while she was working out before he introduced himself and insisted on getting her phone number.
Mm.
And according to the legal documents, Jane Doe reportedly felt he was physically intimidating right from that first interaction.
Okay, so that feeling was there from the start.
That detail, for you listening, it begins to paint a picture of a potential power dynamic right off the bat.
So what happened after that initial meeting?
The lawsuit then describes what it calls a relentless pursuit by Sharpe in the weeks that followed.
Relentless.
Frequent approaches at the gym, numerous calls and text messages, all insisting she meet him outside the gym.
And she initially said no.
According to the suit, yes. Despite her initial refusals, it claims she eventually gave in and agreed to meet him.
Okay.
Now, here's something interesting. Even before that first meeting outside the gym,
Yeah.
there's this particularly noteworthy detail.
Yeah.
The allegation that Sharpe demanded Jane Doe sign a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA.
Before they even met up properly. Wow.
Yeah. She apparently questioned why, found it concerning. The suit says despite his repeated insistence, she refused multiple times.
Good for her.
And eventually, according to the lawsuit, he just dropped the issue and invited her over to his place.
Okay, but that demand for an NDA, that could suggest something, right? Maybe a concern on his part about things getting out.
It certainly could raise that question for you. Why the need for secrecy so early on?
So they did eventually meet. What does the lawsuit say about the relationship itself?
It goes on to state that the relationship that followed was initially consensual,
Okay.
but it was characterized as rocky. She alleges Sharpe insisted they were exclusive, but then she caught him in multiple lies about where he was and who he was seeing.
So, non-monogamy issues, alleged lying.
That's what's claimed.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the filing, Sharpe's behavior allegedly took well, a significantly darker turn around October 2024.
Darker how?
It's claimed he became insistent on recording their sexual activity. Yes. And sometimes, allegedly, without her knowledge or consent.
Oh, that's not okay.
And it also alleges he shared these videos with other people without her permission.
Seriously, sharing them.
That's the allegation. If that's true, I mean, that would be a severe violation of privacy and autonomy.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, this is getting very disturbing.
It is. And the lawsuit includes this alleged quote from Sharpe. It's quite chilling.
What did he allegedly say?
It claims he repeatedly told Jane Doe that he wanted to do things to her that would ensure no other man would ever want her.
What? That's incredibly messed up. For you listening, that alleged statement, it reveals a deeply, deeply troubling mindset.
It really does. And the allegations continue describing this pattern of, well, escalating behavior. The lawsuit claims Sharpe even figured out how to get into Jane Doe's apartment without her permission.
He figured out how to get in, like breaking in.
The details aren't specified, just that he could enter without permission, further underscoring this alleged control and disregard for personal boundaries. The complaint then details 2 alleged instances of violent anal rape in Las Vegas. This was back in October 2024.
Violent rape.
Yes, and it states these occurred despite Jane Doe's repeated pleas for him to stop.
God, that's awful.
Tragically, the allegations don't stop there. The lawsuit describes another alleged sexual assault happening in January 2025.
More recently.
Yes. In this instance, Jane Doe reportedly begged him to stop, but the lawsuit claims he just became more aggressive.
Oh, no.
And refused to use protection. This alleged assault is said to have lasted about 10 minutes.
10 minutes of that. These are incredibly serious claims now, formally before the court.
They are indeed incredibly serious and very graphic as presented in the complaint. Now, to get a better handle on what might happen next, let's look at the legal perspective. That's where John Clune's insights come in.
Right, the attorney from Law and Crime. What did he make of all this?
Well, one of the first things he observed was the timing, filed on Easter Sunday.
Which is unusual.
He noted it's somewhat unconventional, yeah.
Okay. What else?
He also considered Tony Busby's track record, Jane Doe's attorney. Specifically mentioned the dismissal of a lawsuit Busby brought against Jay-Z.
Oh, right, I remember that.
And the subsequent legal action Jay-Z took against the accuser and Busby. Clune kind of raised the point that Busby deciding to pursue another case against a huge public figure like Sharpe might suggest he believes he has a really strong factual basis this time around.
So he probably wouldn't take it on unless he thought there was something substantial there.
Clune explained that while lawyers can be assertive, they are bound by ethical rules. They can't just file frivolous lawsuits.
Right.
They have to have a reasonable belief there's a basis, in fact, something that could withstand an initial legal challenge, like a motion to dismiss, even if they haven't gathered every single piece of evidence yet.
So Busby likely believes Jane Doe's account has merit. That makes sense. For you listening, this just highlights the initial hurdle any lawsuit like this has to clear.
Exactly. And Clune also shed some light on why sexual assault cases, especially ones that might really hinge on credibility,
Yeah.
His word against hers,
Yeah.
why they're often difficult to just get dismissed early on in the legal process.
Why is that?
It typically requires weighing conflicting testimonies. And that's usually something reserved for a trial, not these preliminary motions.
Okay, so it's likely to get serious consideration. That's important for you to know. It's not just going to vanish quickly.
Probably not. Then there's the use of the pseudonym, Jane Doe.
Right. Will she stay anonymous?
Clune thought it was maybe 50-50. He said courts generally prefer transparency, public proceedings, real names.
But there are exceptions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Factors that might lead a court to grant anonymity include, concerns for safety, the potential for really significant shame or trauma, or maybe the age of the plaintiff.
But he also raised the counter-argument, didn't he?
He did. That by choosing to file a lawsuit, bringing a public figure into the spotlight with such serious accusations,
Yeah.
the plaintiff essentially puts their own credibility out there for public scrutiny. So they should generally be prepared to use their own name.
Makes sense. It's a tough balance.
Definitely. Turning to the actual content of the lawsuit, Clune noted how deliberate and graphic the narrative is in the complaint.
Yeah, some of the details are intense.
He suggested that this level of detail might be intentional. to really emphasize the gravity of the allegations and, frankly, capture the court's attention.
What about those alleged recordings we talked about, the videos?
Ah, yes. Clune explained that once the case gets into what's called civil discovery.
Which is when both sides gather evidence.
Exactly. It's a formal process.
Sure.
Jane Doe's legal team has the right to demand any relevant evidence.
Yeah.
And that would absolutely include any recordings, if they exist.
So if those videos are real and show what's alleged, they could be huge evidence. That's crucial for you to understand. Discovery could unearth things.
Potentially game-changing evidence, yes. Now, the fact that Jane Doe and Sharpe reportedly had a prior consensual relationship is also relevant here.
How so? How does that play in?
Well, Clune acknowledged the defense might try to use this, argue that because there was consent before, these later allegations must be false, especially since she allegedly continued the relationship even after that NDA request.
Right. I can see how they might frame that.
However, Clune offered a really crucial counterpoint. He said that while, yes, a history of consensual sex is something the defense might bring up, but there's a growing understanding, thankfully, that people in intimate relationships can still be victims of sexual violence.
Okay. So it's a factor, but it doesn't automatically mean her claims are invalid in the eyes of a jury. That's an important nuance for you to grasp.
Absolutely. It doesn't just cancel out the possibility of non-consensual acts later.
What about proving that alleged assault in January 2025, the most recent one?
Clune highlighted the inherent difficulty there. If there were no independent witnesses, no immediate medical evidence sought, no prior report to the police,
Then it becomes very difficult.
it really can. In those situations, the case's outcome could heavily rely on just the believability of the testimonies, Jane Doe's versus Shannon Sharpe's if it goes to trial.
Just comes down to who the jury finds more credible.
Pretty much.
Okay, let's look at the specific legal claims Jane Doe is actually making. What's she suing for exactly?
She's suing for assault, sexual assault, battery, sexual battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Okay, standard claims in a case like this.
Consistent with the facts presented in the complaint, yes.
Hmm.
And given the recent timing of the alleged incidents, Clune confirmed the statute of limitations. The time limit for filing is likely not an issue here.
Right, because the events were relatively recent.
Correct.
And then there's the money, that huge $50 million figure. How does that break down?
It's broken into several categories. You've got general damages, special damages, punitive damages, and statutory penalties.
Okay, what are general damages?
Clune explained those are to compensate Jane Doe for her emotional distress. Pain and suffering, basically.
And is $10 million reasonable for that, potentially?
He suggested that if the allegations are proven true, given the potential long-term trauma, $10 million for emotional distress isn't necessarily excessive.
Okay. What about special damages? They're seeking over $10 million there, too.
Special damages usually cover quantifiable economic losses. Things like therapy costs, maybe lost wages, or future earning capacity. Clune noted that actually proving that specific $10 million figure might be more challenging. You need receipts, expert testimony.
Got it. Harder to pin down. Then there's punitive damages, $20 million.
Right. Punitive damages aren't about compensating the victim directly. They're meant to punish the defendant for their alleged conduct.
And deter others.
Exactly. Deter similar behavior in the future. Clune actually referenced a recent big verdict in another sexual misconduct case to show that while $20 million is high, it's not totally unheard of if the allegations are substantiated to a really high degree.
Interesting comparison. And the last bit, statutory penalties.
Yeah, another $10 million sought there. Clune was less certain on the specifics, suggesting they'd be tied to particular Nevada state laws related to the alleged conduct.
Okay. So a lot of money on the table, broken down in different ways. Now, it's really important for you listening to know this isn't the only legal challenge Shannon Sharpe is dealing with right now.
That's right. The Law and Crime segment also brought up a separate, ongoing lawsuit. This one was filed in New York back in December 2023.
By a different woman.
Yes, a woman named Michelle Evans. She's representing herself, actually.
Wow. And what's she suing for?
Defamation, libel, slander, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent infliction of emotional distress, seeking at least $14 million in damages.
Okay, so another serious lawsuit. Are the claims similar?
Well, this is what's particularly striking and something for you to really note. There's reported overlap in the claims made by Evans and Jane Doe.
How so?
Evans also alleges non-consensual sexual encounters after she tried to distance herself from Sharpe because of his alleged infidelity.
Same pattern.
And she also claims he had an enraged reaction.
But here's the detail that really jumped out at me from the source.
The quote.
The quote. There's an almost word-for-word match in an alleged quote from Sharpe that shows up in both lawsuits.
It's quite remarkable. Michelle Evans's lawsuit claims Sharpe told her during a sexual assault, "He would make it so no other man would want me."
And Jane Doe's lawsuit, as we heard, states, Sharpe would repeatedly tell Doe that he wanted to do to her things that would make no other man want her.
That identical, very specific and disturbing phrasing, appearing in two separate lawsuits filed by two different women at different times, that's significant.
It really is. That's a significant point to consider, definitely.
It certainly raises questions, doesn't it, about potential patterns of behavior. It can become a key focus in the legal proceedings.
Did the report mention anything else about the Evans case?
Yes, Evans also detailed her alleged damages. Things like long-term psychological harm, PTSD, severe anxiety, depression, public humiliation, loss of dignity, a sense of betrayal.
Sounds devastating.
She apparently even provided a chart outlining the impact of Sharpe's alleged actions on her life.
Wow. But we have to be fair. Has Sharpe responded to the Evans lawsuit?
It's crucial to remember, yes. According to the Law and Crime Report, Shannon Sharpe has denied Michelle Evans's allegations
No.
in a sworn affidavit. He claims that actually Evans was the one being manipulative, threatening, and harassing him through texts and phone calls.
Okay, so clearly two very, very different accounts of what happened in that situation as well.
Absolutely, completely conflicting stories.
So with this new lawsuit from Jane Doe now public, what can we expect from Shannon Sharpe and his legal team in response? What's the likely next step for them?
John Clune anticipates a strong, unequivocal denial.
Flat-out denial.
Yes. Coupled with a statement saying they intend to vigorously defend themselves in court. He expects the initial response might be somewhat general in its language, though.
Not getting into specifics right away.
Probably not initially.
Did Clune mention that matching quote again in terms of a defense strategy?
He did. He considered how Sharpe's legal team might address it.
What could they say?
Clune suggested they might argue that Tony Busby, Jane Doe's lawyer, had access to the Michelle Evans lawsuit, which is publicly filed, before he filed Jane Doe's case.
Ah, implying Busby might have borrowed the language.
Implying the similarity could be attributed to that,
Yeah.
rather than reflecting independent, identical experiences. That's one potential angle.
Okay, interesting tactic. What about settling versus going to trial for someone like Sharpe with such a public profile?
Clune weighed those strategic considerations too. A trial obviously carries huge risks. Negative publicity, potentially really damaging testimony coming out.
Yeah, very risky.
But settling the case could also be interpreted in a certain way by the public, right? Some might see it as an admission of guilt, even if it's denied.
True, damned if you do, damned if you don't, almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Clune suggested that settling might become a more appealing option for Sharpe later on, maybe after the initial intense media storm dies down a bit.
And how would they frame that?
Potentially frame it as just a pragmatic business decision to move forward, put it behind him, all while still maintaining a firm denial of the allegations.
Right, a strategic move rather than an admission.
Possibly.
One last thing. What about criminal charges? Was that discussed?
It was touched upon briefly. Clune pointed out that if Jane Doe is willing to file a formal police report with authorities in Clark County, Nevada.
Where the alleged rapes happened.
Exactly. Criminal charges could be a possibility, especially given the recent timeline. The statute of limitations for criminal offenses might still be open.
But it depends on her reporting it.
Crucially, yes. He doesn't anticipate authorities just launching a criminal investigation on their own based on the civil suit. They'd likely need her to file a report and actively cooperate with an investigation.
Okay, so that's another potential avenue, but it requires her active participation with law enforcement.
Correct.
All right. So as we wrap this up, let's distill the key takeaways for you, our listener. What are the crucial points to remember here?
Okay. First, obviously, the allegations against Shannon Sharpe are extremely serious and warrant very careful consideration as this unfolds.
No question.
Second, litigation involving sexual assault is just inherently complex, especially when you have issues of consent and prior relationships mixed in like we've talked about.
It's rarely straightforward.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the presence or absence of corroborating evidence, like those potential recordings or lack of witnesses, will likely be a really critical factor.
What else?
And finally, the existence of that separate lawsuit, the Michelle Evans case, with those strikingly similar allegations, particularly that quote, It adds a really significant layer of complexity and raises some important questions.
It really does. It makes you reflect, doesn't it?
Mm.
How do these kinds of high-profile accusations shape our understanding of celebrity accountability?
Yeah, and what does it tell you about the often immense challenges faced by individuals who decide to come forward with claims like these against powerful figures?
That's a lot to think about.
Indeed. It definitely encourages you to follow this evolving story through reliable news sources and maybe remain mindful of the broader societal issues around consent and sexual violence that these cases inevitably push into the spotlight.
Absolutely. As the legal process moves forward, whatever the outcome, these allegations really compel us all to confront some uncomfortable truths, don't they? About power dynamics and relationships and the fundamental importance, the fundamental meaning of the word no.